Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at the world of autism,
Okay.
specifically the experiences of women in the autistic community.
Interesting.
And we've got a whole bunch of articles and blog posts. A lot of these are really focusing on the challenges that
Yeah.
women face in this community.
Right.
So this is going to be a really fascinating deep dive. You might find yourself even challenging some of your own assumptions about autism.
It's interesting because, we often talk about autism as if it's just one thing.
Yeah.
It's a whole spectrum,
Right.
and everybody experiences it differently.
Absolutely.
And I think when we add in the impact of gender roles and societal expectations,
Right.
that's where things get really
Really interesting.
complicated.
Yeah, and that's kind of what really stood out to me when I was going through these sources.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of autistic women feel like there's this unspoken double standard.
A double standard for sure, where behavior that might be excused or attributed to neurodiversity in men
Oh, yeah.
is judged differently when it's coming from women.
Totally.
And one example that the articles highlighted was interrupting in conversations.
Oh, yeah. I can definitely see how that plays out. Like, we all know someone, right, who maybe talks a bit too much,
Absolutely.
doesn't pick up on those subtle social cues to kind of reel it in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I can only imagine for autistic women,
Right.
that becomes even more complex.
If an autistic man interrupts frequently, it might be seen as him being assertive or passionate.
Uh-huh.
But if an autistic woman does the same thing,
Right.
she might be labeled as rude, aggressive, or even bossy.
It's like they're being penalized for a behavior that's totally understood when it's a man doing it.
Right.
Which leads us to this term, I know it can be a little bit controversial,
Uh-huh.
autistic male privilege.
Yeah, and it's important to approach this term with nuance.
Okay.
We're not saying that all autistic men are privileged or that they don't face challenges of their own.
Right.
What we're talking about here is a pattern where neurodiversity is sometimes used to justify behavior
Okay.
that can be harmful, especially towards women.
Like, what kind of behavior are we talking about here?
The articles give some pretty eye-opening examples, things like a lack of empathy being excused
Wow.
or a sense of entitlement in social interactions.
Interesting.
One author even recounts a story of an autistic man who constantly interrupted and talked over her during a meeting.
Oh, jeez.
And when she tried to address it, he simply said, "Well, I'm autistic, so I can't help it."
Wow.
And his behavior was dismissed.
It's so frustrating to hear, but it sounds like the author's point wasn't to demonize this man at all.
Right.
It was just to highlight how this dynamic can play out,
Exactly.
the impact it has on women in the autistic community.
And that impact can be significant.
Yeah.
These double standards can lead to a sense of isolation
Okay.
for autistic women.
Like they don't belong even within the autistic community itself.
Exactly.
That feeling of not belonging came up a lot in the articles, and it was often connected to this constant feeling of having to accommodate or excuse certain behaviors.
The articles went so far as to talk about the emotional toll
Uh-huh.
this takes on autistic women, leading to things like burnout, emotional distress.
And even in some cases, gaslighting.
Yes, one blogger described being told she was overreacting or misinterpreting situations
Wow.
when she tried to address these double standards, which is
It's gotta be.
incredibly invalidating and damaging.
And, it can make it even harder to speak up and share your experiences, but that's exactly what these articles are encouraging people to do.
Yes.
Break the silence.
Break the silence.
Change the narrative.
Absolutely.
Right.
And change the narrative around autism and gender. And what I think is so fascinating about these articles is that they don't just highlight the problems. They offer some really practical advice
Yeah.
on how to navigate some of these situations.
Like tangible things that people can do.
Exactly. And one of the most important strategies that they emphasize is setting boundaries.
Which makes sense. I mean, boundaries are important in any relationship.
Absolutely. But for autistic women who are facing these kinds of double standards,
Yeah.
clear boundaries can be even more crucial.
Okay.
It's about knowing your limits
Uh-huh.
and communicating them effectively, even when it feels uncomfortable.
So what might that look like in a real-life situation?
Like, let's say you're in a social setting
Okay.
and someone is dominating the conversation and you're feeling overwhelmed or unheard.
Right.
Setting a boundary could be as simple as saying, I need a moment to process this.
Okay.
Or, would you mind if we took turns sharing our thoughts?
Those are great examples. It's about advocating for your needs
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's respectful, but also firm.
Exactly. And another important strategy the sources highlight is the power of seeking support.
Which could mean
It could mean connecting with other autistic women
Okay.
who understand what you're going through, finding a therapist who specializes in neurodiversity, or even joining an online support group. One article specifically mentioned the value of online communities
Oh, yeah.
for autistic women because they can provide a space
Yeah.
to connect with others who share similar experiences and feel less alone.
That makes a lot of sense, especially if you're feeling isolated.
It's about finding your tribe,
Mm-hmm.
the people who get it, and building on that idea of support.
Okay.
Several sources also stress the importance of self-care.
Self-care is so important, and so much of what we've talked about today, highlights the emotional labor involved in
Absolutely.
navigating these complex dynamics.
Self-care is not a luxury. It's essential.
Totally.
And it doesn't have to be, complicated or expensive.
Right.
It's about recognizing what replenishes your energy and well-being
Uh-huh.
and making time for those activities.
Absolutely.
Whether it's spending time in nature, listening to music,
Yeah.
reading a book, or simply taking a few minutes to just relax and recharge.
These are all great takeaways, but I'm also wondering, what did the sources have to say about addressing the bigger picture, like the systemic issues at play here?
Well, one of the things that stood out to me is the call for everyone, autistic or not,
Yeah.
to challenge these harmful stereotypes and double standards.
So it's not just about individual actions, it's about a collective shift in how we understand and interact with autistic people, especially women.
Right. The sources emphasize the need for ongoing education and awareness raising.
Okay.
It's about questioning our assumptions, listening to voices of autistic women,
Mm-hmm.
and advocating for a more nuanced understanding of autism and its impact on individuals of all genders.
I like how one of the articles framed it. This isn't just about autism.
Right.
It's about how we treat each other as human beings.
It's about respect and understanding.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that everyone deserves to feel seen, heard, and respected,
Absolutely.
regardless of how their brain is wired.
It feels like we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
It's been really eye-opening, to be honest, even for someone like me who thought I had a pretty decent understanding of autism.
I think that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
There's always more to learn
Right.
when it comes to understanding the diverse experiences within the autistic community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listener?
I think the key takeaway here is that while there has been a lot of progress
Mm-hmm.
in raising awareness about autism,
Right.
there are still these hidden dynamics at play,
Yeah.
particularly for women.
Absolutely.
And, those dynamics can create unique challenges and barriers.
Challenges that often go unrecognized.
Exactly.
Dismissed.
But by shedding light on these issues,
Yeah.
by having these conversations, we can start to shift the narrative
Okay.
and create a more inclusive and equitable environment for all autistic people.
And hopefully help more autistic women feel seen, heard, and understood.
This brings up a really important question for all of us to consider. How can we, as individuals and as a society, work to dismantle these harmful double standards
Yeah.
and create a world where all autistic people, regardless of gender,
Right.
feel valued and respected?
It's a powerful question, and it might feel a little overwhelming
Yeah.
to think about, where to even begin.
Right.
But I think these sources that we've talked about today give us some really great starting points.
They do?
Educating ourselves, challenging stereotypes when we encounter them, listening to and amplifying the
Oh,
voices of
good.
autistic women.
Those are all things we can do.
These are all concrete actions we can take.
And remember, even small actions can make a difference.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and compassionate world.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive
Absolutely.
into the world of autism and gender. We hope you'll continue these conversations and consider how you can contribute to a more inclusive future for
Mhm.
everyone on the spectrum. And until next time, keep diving deeper.